I was literally shocked when I sat down and realized how much of what we are told back home about the UK is basically a massive continent-sized lie. Seriously, before I moved here, my brain was full of these weird, cartoonish stereotypes. I pictured a rainy, grey island where everyone talks like Mary Poppins, eats boiled meat, has terrible teeth, and dodges knife-wielding maniacs while waiting 6 years for a doctor's appointment. Now that I've been living in the UK for almost 2 years as an American expat, I have to spill the tea, and I mean proper tea, not that microwaved water we drink back in the States. Here is the truth. We need to talk about this because the cultural dissonance is wild. I am going to break down 9 massive myths Americans are told about the UK, and I am going to give you the history, the statistics, and the psychology behind exactly why we get it so incredibly wrong. Let's start with a heavy one that absolutely drives me insane. Myth number 1: the UK is insanely dangerous because of knife crime. In the US, we would never hear the end of this on certain news networks. We are constantly told that because the UK banned handguns, criminals just switched to knives. And now London is this apocalyptic war zone where you can't walk down the street without wearing chainmail. I was actually nervous when I first moved here. I thought I needed to keep my head on a swivel, but let's look at the actual data, because the statistics will literally blow your mind. The United States has a higher rate of knife crime per capita than the United Kingdom. Let me repeat that. You are more likely to be stabbed in the US than you are in the UK. According to the World Population Review and various crime index data from recent years, the US consistently outpaces the UK in knife-related homicides per million people. We just don't hear about our knife crime back home because it is completely overshadowed by our gun violence. So why does this myth exist? It exists because when a stabbing happens in the UK, it is massive national news. The media sensationalizes it because violent crime is statistically so much rarer here. And honestly, this is one of those topics where the really interesting part is what I couldn't even fit in here. So if you want that version, join the membership below. That's where I go deeper, get more personal, and tell the parts I usually leave out of the main video. Psychologically, living here has fundamentally changed my ambient anxiety. Back home, you go to a movie theater, a grocery store, or a parade, and there is always this tiny subconscious voice in the back of your head looking for the exits. You just know that any altercation could escalate to gunfire. Here, that anxiety is completely gone. Yes, crime exists. Yes, London has rough areas. But the baseline level of public safety is so profoundly different that it makes the American narrative about dangerous Britain look like an absolute joke. Now, let's totally switch gears to myth number 2, which is deeply ingrained in the American psyche. The NHS is a socialist nightmare where you will die waiting for basic healthcare. Back home, politicians love to use the National Health Service as a bogeyman. We are told that Brits wait months for a cast on a broken leg, that the government decides if you live or die, and that the doctors are terrible. I was terrified of getting sick when I first moved here, but then I actually had to use it. I had a severe ear infection, the kind that makes your jaw throb. I called my local GP surgery at 8 a.m. I was triaged over the phone, seen by a doctor at 11:30 a.m., and walked out with a prescription. Do you know what I paid at the doctor's office? Zero. Nothing. No copay, no deductibles, no arguing with an insurance adjuster who has zero medical training. And my prescription? In England, all NHS prescriptions are a flat rate of around £9 or £10, regardless of what the medication is. If you are in Scotland or Wales, prescriptions are literally free. Here is the historical context you need to understand. The NHS was founded in 1948 by Aneurin Bevan after the absolute devastation of World War II. The country was bankrupt, cities were bombed out, but there was a massive societal consensus that healthcare should be a human right based on clinical need, not the ability to pay. It is the closest thing the British have to a national religion. Now, is the NHS perfect? Absolutely not. It is currently underfunded, understaffed, and recovering from pandemic backlogs. If you need an elective surgery like a hip replacement or a non-urgent knee surgery, yes, you will be on a waiting list, sometimes for months. But here is the massive counter-argument that Americans completely ignore. Private healthcare exists in the UK. If you want to skip the line, you can buy private insurance, and it is incredibly cheap compared to the US. We're talking maybe $100 a month for a premium policy because the private sector has to compete with the free public sector. If you get hit by a bus or get cancer, the NHS will treat you immediately, world-class care, and you will never ever have to set up a GoFundMe to save your life. The peace of mind is invaluable. Moving on to myth number 3. This is my absolute favorite to debunk because it's hilarious. Myth number 3. British homes are stuck in the dark ages. They don't have AC, their fridges are tiny, and they have those weird separate hot and cold taps in the sink. Okay, let's unpack the separate taps first, because I was literally shocked the first time I washed my hands and had to choose between freezing my fingers off or receiving third-degree burns. Why don't they just use mixer taps? Well, it's not because they are backwards, it's a legacy of post-war housing and public health laws. After Dwetui, to ensure water pressure, most British homes were built with a cold water storage cistern in the attic. The water that went to the hot water cylinder came from this attic tank, which was often open to the elements, dust, and occasionally a dead pigeon. Therefore, the hot water was legally not considered potable or safe to drink. By law, they had to keep the hot water completely separated from the cold, direct from the mains drinking water, so there was no cross-contamination. Today, modern homes have combi boilers and mixer taps, but the older houses still have the separate taps out of tradition or because they haven't upgraded the plumbing. Before we continue, I need to address the silent majority. Apparently 87% of you watching are not subscribed. So if you are one of those people who keeps returning for the drama, the comparisons, and the mild psychological damage, hit subscribe. You're already part of this at this point. And the lack of air conditioning? It's not because they hate comfort, it's because of the latitude and the architecture. London is further north than Calgary, Canada. Historically, the entire goal of British architecture has been to keep heat in, not out. Homes are built from solid brick with heavy insulation and double-glazed windows to survive damp, freezing winters. Until the last decade, summer temperatures rarely went above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Having central AC for 3 hot days a year was an absurd waste of money. Of course, with climate change, this is becoming a serious issue, and July heat waves in a brick oven house are miserable. And the tiny fridges? That's cultural. In the US, we drive our SUVs to Costco and buy enough groceries to survive a nuclear winter. In the UK, cities are incredibly walkable. People tend to go to the local shop every couple of days to buy fresh ingredients. You don't need a massive walk-in fridge when you buy your produce fresh 3 times a week. Let's dive into myth number 4. British people are incredibly polite, proper, and formal. We have this image of Hugh Grant stammering apologies, drinking tea with his pinky up, and everyone being incredibly emotionally reserved. Here is the psychological reality, and it took me a good 6 months to figure this out. The British are not polite in the way Americans understand politeness. In fact, if a British person is being overwhelmingly polite to you, using formal language, and smiling tightly, there is a very good chance they absolutely despise you. In the US, we are what sociologists call a peach culture. We are soft and sweet on the outside. We smile at strangers, we tell our life story to the cashier, we say, "Oh my gosh, we totally have to get coffee," and then never speak to that person again. The British are a coconut culture. They have a hard, slightly prickly exterior. They don't smile at strangers on the tube, they keep to themselves. But once you crack that shell, they are incredibly loyal, sweet, and intimate friends. And how do they show that intimacy? Through banter. Banter is the cultural cornerstone of the UK. It involves aggressively mocking, insulting, and taking the mick out of your friends. I was literally shocked when my British friend greeted me at the pub by calling me an absolute idiot for my choice of jacket. In the US, we would be deeply offended. Here, sarcasm and gentle bullying are love languages. It shows that they trust you enough to know you won't take offense. Furthermore, the famous British sorry. You will bump into a British person and they will apologize to you. Americans think this means they are taking the blame. They aren't. In British psychology, sorry, in that context, just means I am acknowledging that an awkward situation has occurred. It's social lubrication, not a confession of guilt. If you take their apologies literally, you will fundamentally misunderstand the entire social dynamic of the country. This leads me perfectly to myth number 5. British food is bland, boiled, and terrible. We all know the joke. The British conquered half the globe for spices and decided to use absolutely none of them. We picture baked beans on toast, grey meat, and mushy peas. Let me tell you, this myth is decades out of date. To understand why Americans think British food is bad, we have to look at history. During World War II, the UK was effectively an island under siege. German U-boats blocked supply lines, leading to intense national rationing. But here is the kicker that most Americans don't know. British rationing didn't end when the war ended in 1945. It actually got stricter and lasted until 1954. That is over 14 years of extreme culinary restriction. An entire generation grew up with powdered eggs, minimal butter, and cheap cuts of meat. It essentially wiped out their traditional culinary heritage for a couple of decades. The American soldiers who were stationed here during and just after the war took that stereotype back to the US, and it stuck forever. Today, the food scene here is absolutely world-class. London has more Michelin-starred restaurants than most major global cities, but even outside the high-end stuff, the quality of basic ingredients in the UK is vastly superior to the US. Their food standards, historically tied to EU regulations, ban a massive amount of the artificial dyes, high fructose corn syrup, and preservatives that are legally pumped into American food. A simple strawberry here tastes like an actual complex fruit, not a sugar cube. And we cannot talk about British food without talking about Indian food. The British Empire's dark colonial history resulted in a massive South Asian diaspora in the UK, which completely transformed the national palate. The national dish of the UK isn't fish and chips, it is chicken tikka masala. The curries you get in a random local pub in a mid-sized British town will absolutely blow the best Indian food in Middle America out of the water. Oh, and the cheese. We think of France as the cheese capital of the world, but the UK actually produces more distinct varieties of cheese than France does. British food is incredible. You just have to stop looking at it through a 1950s lens. Let's tackle myth number 6, the weather. It rains in the UK every single day. You picture this perpetual monsoon, a miserable grey island where the sun hasn't been seen since the Victorian era. This is an optical illusion mixed with historical fiction. Here's the truth. London gets less annual rainfall than New York City. It gets less rain than Miami. It gets less rain than Sydney, Australia, and Rome, Italy. I know, I was literally shocked when I saw those statistics. So why do we think it constantly rains? Because of the type of rain and the cloud cover. In New York or Miami, it will aggressively pour down in a dramatic thunderstorm for an hour, dumping inches of rain, and then the sun comes out. In the UK, particularly in England, it drizzles, it mists. It's what the locals call spitting. It might be damp all day, but the actual volume of water falling from the sky is remarkably low. More importantly, it's the cloud cover. The UK has a very high number of grey days, which emotionally feels like bad weather even if you don't need an umbrella. But there is also a historical literary reason we think of it this way. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, London was powered by coal. The combination of local mist and millions of coal chimneys created pea soupers, thick green-yellow toxic smog that blanketed the city. When American authors and filmmakers adapted Charles Dickens' novels or Sherlock Holmes stories, they emphasized this foggy, damp, miserable atmosphere. Hollywood cemented the rainy, foggy London aesthetic in the 1930s and 40s, and we just never let it go. Plus, the UK benefits from the Gulf Stream, a warm ocean current that brings mild air up from the Caribbean. Because of this, despite being so far north, the UK actually has a highly temperate climate. It rarely freezes solid, and it rarely boils, it's just mild. Alright, myth number 7, and this one makes me laugh every time I go back to the States. Myth 7, everyone in the UK speaks with a posh Downton Abbey accent or sounds like a Cockney chimney sweep. In the US, our media representation of the UK is basically just the royal family, Hugh Grant and maybe Gordon Ramsay. We think the British accent is one monolithic thing. Let me be very clear, there is no such thing as a British accent. The linguistic diversity on this tiny island is staggering. Linguists estimate there are nearly 40 different major dialects in the UK, and they change drastically every 20 to 30 miles. The posh accent you are thinking of is called received pronunciation, or RP. Do you know what percentage of the UK population actually speaks with pure RP? About 2 to 3%. That's it. It is entirely a class-based accent, historically cultivated in elite public schools like Eton and Oxford to distinguish the aristocracy from the working class. The roots of this class language divide go all the way back to the Norman conquest of 1066, when the French-speaking elite ruled over the Germanic-speaking Anglo-Saxon peasants. To this day, language here is deeply tied to class. If you drive just 2 hours north of London to Birmingham, you hit the Brummie accent, which sounds completely alien to American ears. Go another couple of hours to Liverpool, and you have Scouse, which is highly nasal, fast, and heavily influenced by Irish immigration. Go to Newcastle, and you get Geordie. Cross into Scotland, and you have Glaswegian, which is so thick and distinct that occasionally British television will put subtitles on Scottish people for the English audience. The reality is that the UK is a patchwork quilt of hyperlocal, deeply historic dialects. If you walk into a pub in Yorkshire expecting everyone to sound like Colin Firth, you are going to be very confused and they are going to ruthlessly make fun of you. Speaking of geography, let's hit myth number 8, which is honestly a little embarrassing for us Americans, the myth that the UK and England are the exact same thing. In the States, we use England, Great Britain, and the UK interchangeably. We would never do that here unless we wanted to start a bar fight. I learnt this the hard way during my first month here when I asked a guy from Edinburgh what it was like growing up in England. The look he gave me could have frozen the sun. Here is the structural and historical reality. The United Kingdom is a sovereign state comprised of 4 distinct nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Great Britain is just the name of the largest island, which contains England, Scotland, and Wales. Calling a Welsh or Scottish person English is not just geographically incorrect, it is deeply culturally offensive. These nations have long, bloody histories of war, subjugation, and eventual union. Scotland, for example, joined with England in the 1707 Act of Union, but they retained their own distinct legal system, their own educational system, and their own national church. In 1999, the UK went through a process called devolution, which created the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Send, and the Northern Ireland Assembly. This means these nations govern many of their own internal affairs independently from London. They have their own languages too. Welsh is heavily spoken in Wales, and signs are bilingual. The cultures are distinct. The patriotism is distinct. When they play rugby or soccer, they don't play as the UK, England, Scotland, and Wales play against each other, and the rivalries are fierce. Because America is a massive, continent-spanning country under one federal identity, we struggle to comprehend how an island the size of Michigan can house 4 incredibly distinct national identities that refuse to be homogenized. And finally, we have arrived at myth number 9, the ultimate stereotype, the Austin Powers special. The myth that British teeth are absolutely horrific. We've all seen the jokes in The Simpsons. We've seen the Hollywood portrayals. Americans are obsessed with teeth. But let's look at the hard statistics, because this is where the American mindset gets completely exposed. According to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the UK actually has consistently better dental health than the United States. Yes, you heard me. If you look at the DMFT index, which measures the number of decayed, missing, and filled teeth in 12-year-olds, the UK scores better than the US. British people statistically have fewer cavities and fewer missing teeth than Americans. So why do we think their teeth are so bad? Because Americans and Brits have completely different psychological definitions of what makes a good tooth. In the US, dentistry is heavily privatized, highly competitive, and fundamentally cosmetic. We believe that healthy teeth must be blindingly unnaturally white and perfectly straight, achieved through years of expensive braces, veneers, and chemical bleaching. It is a status symbol of wealth and class in America. In the UK, dentistry is largely handled by the NHS. The NHS operates on a principle of health and function, not cosmetics. An NHS dentist will make sure your teeth are strong, clean, disease-free, and capable of chewing food without pain. They will not, however, pay to chemically bleach your teeth to look like piano keys, nor will they hand out braces unless there is a clinical, functional need for them. Therefore, a British person might have teeth that are slightly crooked or naturally off-white, but structurally, those teeth are incredibly healthy. Americans see slightly crooked, natural-colored teeth and immediately register them as bad or unhealthy, because we have been conditioned by the multi-billion-dollar American orthodontic industry to view anything less than a glowing, perfectly symmetrical Hollywood smile as a failure. It is entirely a difference in cultural aesthetics, not actual dental hygiene. Living in the UK has been the most incredible eye-opening experience of my life, but the biggest lesson I've learned isn't just about how the British live. It's about how looking closely at another culture forces you to hold a mirror up to your own. We believe these myths about the UK because it makes us feel better about the way we do things. We hype up their knife crime so we don't have to look at our own violence. We tear down the NHS so we can justify paying thousands of dollars for basic care. We laugh at their teeth because we spend a fortune on ours. Breaking down these myths doesn't just give you a better understanding of the UK, it completely shatters the illusions we are sold back home.